past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings. Welcome back. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, now the president is to attend the gathering of top generals, upending the last minute plans. He'll join hundreds of generals summoned to Virginia on short notice by Defense Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Of course, adding additional security. What is the point of all of this, and what signals should we take away from this meeting? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let me quickly run down a couple of headlines. Shutdown nears as President Trump plans to meet with leaders in Congress. The government will shut down at 12:01 a.m. this Wednesday. Unless lawmakers act, Democrats and Republicans are at a standstill on health care spending and a funding extension. Leaders from Congress will meet with the president this afternoon as both parties blame each other for this looming shutdown. So let me quickly look at what has transpired. Last week, as the deadline drew near, the president throws gas on the fire as a pressure tactic. If you shut down the government, I will fire more federal employees. All of this in the wake of hundreds of federal employees who lost their jobs during Musk's cost-cutting blitz have been asked to return to work. So the initial cost-cutting or employee cutting proved to be a blunder. Now you got to call people back. And to put pressure on the Democrats, you're threatening to fire more people. I guess he figures he can force the Democrats' hand by trying to tie his threat of another mass firing to the Dems holding their line on medical insurance coverage. Then Mike Johnson shuts down Congress late last week. Trump cancels the planned meeting with the congressional leaders, and Trump says, quote, after reviewing the details of the unserious and ridiculous demands being made by the minority radical left Democrats in return for their votes to keep our thriving country open, I have decided that no meeting with their congressional leaders could possibly be productive. So the president has forced this crisis, and we will see if this time the Democrats once again cave to the pressure, or will they call his bluff? Another issue. There were 2 deadly attacks in the United States this past weekend. Investigators in Michigan have interviewed more than 100 people as they work to establish why a gunman drove his vehicle into a church, opened fire, and then set the building ablaze. 4 people were killed and 8 others were injured when the suspect, Thomas Jacob Sanford, attacked the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc. He was later shot dead by police. Finally, investigation continues into a mass shooting that occurred in the coastal North Carolina city of Southport on Saturday. Shots were fired from a boat in the intercoastal waterway around 9:30 p.m., resulted in several deaths and multiple injuries at a Southport bar called the American Fish Company. The suspect in the Southport shooting was identified as Nigel Max Edge of Oak Island. He's charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and 5 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, intent to kill, inflicting serious injury. Additional charges could be forthcoming. And this was just announced about 30 minutes ago. The president is going to head the Gaza Board of Peace in a new post-war plan. He's going to chair this International Board of Peace to govern and reconstruct the Gaza Strip as part of a 20-point plan released earlier today by the White House, describing an end to the war between Israel and Hamas and a transition toward peace. Well, folks, these are incredibly perilous times that we find ourselves living in. On today's episode, the issue before us is President Trump has decided he's going to the last-minute global gathering of the nation's top generals that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered last week, setting the stage for a highly unusual meeting between the commander-in-chief and the U.S. military leaders. To get some insight into this, my guest is a retired United States Army colonel who played key roles in government, including serving as Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell and Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Colin Powell. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, as always, welcome back.
Good to be with you.
So as I understand it, almost every general and admiral in the military, including many from global commands, are required to show up at the Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. I think this is tomorrow. The unprecedented event will be one of the only times such an assembly of senior military leaders have been seen in the same place. In fact, on Facebook, Secretary of Defense Hegseth provided his rationale or explanation of this. Let's show this video, and then Colonel Wilkerson will get your take on this.
We're back with more DoD reforms. This one is General and Flag Officer Reductions. That's the official title. My title is Less Generals, More GIs. It's a historic one, and it's in keeping with President Trump's commitment to achieving peace through strength. We're going to shift resources from bloated headquarters elements to our warfighters. Let's take a bit of a trip down memory lane. In history, when we were fighting across the globe during World War II, we had a force that was 12 million strong. For that 12 million man element, we had 17 4- and 5-star generals. Today, we have 2.1 million service members with 44 4-star and flag officers. So it used to be a ratio of 1 general to 6,000 troops. Today, it's 1 general to 1,400. More generals and admirals does not equal more success. Now, this is not a slash and burn exercise meant to punish high-ranking officers. Nothing could be further from the truth. This has been a deliberative process, working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff with one goal: maximizing strategic readiness and operational effectiveness by making prudent reductions in the general and flag officer ranks. So there's 2 phases here. Phase 1, we're looking at our current service structure. And in phase 2, it's a strategic review of the Unified Command Plan. Now, this is going to be, we think, the most comprehensive review since the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reorganization Act of 1986. That was a generational change in combat command structures, planning, training, geographic areas of responsibility, mission, and operational responsibilities. So, as I said, it's going to happen in 2 phases. The result of phase 1 is a minimum of 20% reduction of 4-star and flag officers for active duty elements, and a minimum of 20% reduction of general and flag officers in the National Guard Bureau. Phase 2 will produce a minimum of an additional 10% reduction of overall general and flag officers throughout the DoD, in conjunction with a realignment of the Unified Command Plan. It's going to be done carefully, but it's going to be done expeditiously. We confront a complex and evolving threat environment. We cannot afford to wait. We got to be lean and mean. And in this case, it means general officer reductions.
Colonel Wilkerson, what does this mean to you?
I have mixed emotions about it because General Powell, when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I and people on the Joint Staff had a discussion about cutting flag officers. That's what he really was aiming at. We would have gone even further than he's going had we thought it was possible at the time. For different reasons, the Joint Staff and General Powell himself decided not to pursue it and to put it off for the future. All to say this is very, very necessary, very necessary. And his statistics alone illustrate how necessary it is. When's the last time we won a war?
Statistics.
Yes.
Okay.
When's the last time we won a war? I mean, when you talk about how many we had with 12 million men under arms in World War II and how many we have now with much fewer people under arms, and it's something like 10 to 1, that's ridiculous. So I support 100%. I don't believe he'll be able to achieve it because the bureaucratic forces are just too powerful, but I support it 100%. I would even go deeper into the percentage of cuts. Second thing I'm worried about is the way he had to read that. Now, I know he didn't want to make any mistakes, and I know that he was eager to get everything right, percentages, history, the number of admirals and generals and so forth. But still, the fact that he had to read it and to consult it on several points as he was reading it bothers me a little bit. It tells me he's not steeped in it. It tells me that it came from somewhere else than his fertile brain. That's worrisome. And then there are huge aspects of this meeting that are worrisome, not the least of which is that Donald Trump has now decided he will come. We all know that Hegseth, even if he has any capability to manage, to lead, to operate as an individual, is a sycophant whenever Trump is around. All you have to do is look at his body language. He doesn't want to say anything or do anything in Trump's presence that won't be blessed by Trump. And that is a really difficult task. So he usually stays pretty quiet. Trump is going to put a damper on this if what Hegseth wants to do is carry out what he just stated there in that video in a more or less economic and profitable way. So I'm worried about that aspect of it. And then there are other things that rise to my thoughts readily. Is he really going to be checking, vetting, as it were, these admirals and generals to see if they are not Mark Millies, to see if they are not the kind of people that will refuse to cooperate with him when it comes time to do something really untoward, even unconstitutional, like what we're already doing, killing people on the high seas without due process? That's a war crime. He's responsible for that war crime. There could be some tribunals, as it were, after the Trump administration, if we're all still here and still a republic and reasonably democratic processes in use. And he could go to jail. He could go to jail for a long time. So could many of the members of this administration. I don't think that's going to happen because America seems to be slipping down the slippery slope of doing unconstitutional things. Its Congress is complacent and compliant. Its Supreme Court usually verifies them in legal terms. And the president, we don't even have to talk about. The executive branch is broken into many pieces and one never knows where it's going to go. But this meeting at Quantico, while it has those positive implications that I indicated, worries me more than it gives me hope because it is who's conducting it, Trump and Hegseth, and it's dangerous. And I'll just point out at the end, lots of people are talking about the meeting in 1935 in the Weimar Republic, where Hitler called all of his flag officers, the Wehrmacht and others, into Berlin and told them their oath from that point on would not be to the Weimar Republic,
but to him.
It would be to him, to Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
That worries me. That has the patina of this is sort of like that. That bothers me.
One of the first things that jumped out at me as I viewed the video was, hasn't he ever heard of a thing called a teleprompter?
Yeah.
That was the first thing that, and because to your point, not only did he have to continue to look at the script, but it was open, make a point, close.
Yeah.
Open, make a point, close. Oh, I mean,
maybe it was because he wanted to dramatically show himself signing it at the end. I don't know. I haven't a clue.
Well, again, and I know he watches the show. Pete, get a teleprompter. Some of your former colleagues I've been listening to for the last few days, they say, first of all, the meeting is only scheduled to be an hour. Mm-hmm. So you're flying all of these flag officers in, and not only are you flying in flag officers, you're flying in, you got to fly in their staffs. And I also, I don't remember who it was. A former retired general was saying that you never want to be called before the Secretary of Defense for a meeting and not be prepared, and that they don't really know the agenda, and so they don't know how to prepare. So if they're called upon for input, they won't know what to say. Your thoughts?
Well, that's a point, but anybody wearing 2, 3, or 4 stars, for God's sake, ought to be able to know what to say, even if they aren't prepared. I mean, it's kind of moot. I won't say that that's the case with these 3 stars and 4 stars. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't follow any 3 or 4 star on active duty today to water to drink if I were dying of thirst. That's how bad they are. When's the last time we won a war, Wilbur?
World War II.
Thank you. Well, I'd say the first Gulf War.
But are we still fighting it?
Oh, well, we wouldn't have been if HW was in. We wouldn't have been, because he wasn't going to Baghdad. No way he was going to Baghdad. But here's another concern, logistically speaking. This is a lot of airplanes. I hope they're already coming in sort of seriatim, as it were, over time, and using different airports and such, because this is going to be one hell of a crowd at some airport or
national.
I can't believe that. Surely they're not all going to arrive within the same 10-hour period, because that would be a logistic nightmare. But I go back to what I've been discussing this, as you can imagine, with lots of military people and others too. And we've talked about the positive part of it, but we've mostly been talking about the negative parts and what it could mean, what it could portend. And that worries me. It really troubles me, because all of these people I've been talking to are solid citizens. They're veterans. They're out now, but they're colonels and brigadiers and 2 stars and such. And they're very concerned. They're very concerned what this is demonstrating across the ranks of the military. Even if it is not meant to do so, it looks as if it is a veiled reprimand. And having Trump there, one doesn't know what's going to flow out of that man's mouth, ever. You could really cause a problem.
Well, to that point, last week I was watching a press conference, and a reporter asked him about the meeting, and it was obvious when he was asked the question, he didn't know about the meeting.
I wouldn't doubt it.
And he said he tried to bluff it. He tried to play it off, and then, because in fact he initially gave the inference that this was a meeting of foreign flag officers, foreign generals. And J.D. Vance had to step in and, try to turn the iron on and try to rub these wrinkles out.
There's no one coordinating the government. None. The National Security Advisor and his deputy or her deputy have the responsibility under the 1947 National Security Act, as it has evolved, to more or less coordinate policy for the government. And that means they have developed a real framework underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
They have interagency working groups that feature a deputy secretary of state or defense, war. Then they move up to a deputies committee, which features, as it says, the deputies of each of the cabinets that are necessary for the meeting. Then they move up to and each of these meetings refines the courses of action and the decision-making paraphernalia for the president, if you will, as it comes up. Then they have a principals meeting, which, as that name suggests, is all the cabinet officers involved. Normally, always the Secretary of War, Defense, and the Secretary of State, but often the Secretary of Treasury, the Director of the CIA, the DNI, and so forth. Then it goes to the National Security Council, where the president, having all this work be done and teed up, basically by the National Security Advisor, can make a decision, a reasonable decision. They're not doing that. They don't even have a National Security Advisor. Not really. Rubio's too busy trying to cause a war with Venezuela. So they don't have anybody to coordinate. So, as I said, it doesn't surprise me that Donald Trump doesn't know what's going on in his own government. There's no one running this government, period.
No one running the government, period. Peggy Parks Miller, Dr. Leon and Colonel Wilkerson, do you think the ones who are not fired will be required to do a loyalty agreement? And I thought the loyalty agreement was already done when you swear the oath at boot camp.
I swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
So you can't, well, you know a little bit more about the operations of the military than I do. I don't think you could just chop flag officers at the top without doing an entire restructuring of the operation of the military.
Yes, you have to think that was in that document too. He just didn't read it. Take the defense.
He didn't turn the paper over to know it was there.
Yeah. You take the Defense Logistics Agency or the Defense Intelligence Agency or any of these huge conglomerations that have grown up since World War II, many of which need trimming badly, many of which might even need total elimination badly. And they're headed by 3 and 4 stars or equivalent civilians. These, as you just indicated, they've got to be honed down. If they are doing anything that is necessary, it's got to be transferred into another agency or another organization and preserved. The rest of it can be gotten rid of, because a lot of what they're doing now is just pushing papers around, like any bureaucracy. So if you're going to do it, you're absolutely right. You've got to make sure you've got the organizational structure that you want before you start firing the people who are in charge of the old group.
But before you get to the organizational structure, you also then have to do an assessment and a realignment of your military objective.
Absolutely.
As a military.
And there's another part to it too that people don't really think about. If you go back, remember he was talking about history in World War II and 12 million men under arms. If you go back to that period, you will find that much of the responsibilities that accrue to a 2 and 3 star and even a 4-star general today or admiral were being managed quite well, thank you very much, by a major or a lieutenant colonel or at most a colonel. George Marshall had a host of people like that who were every bit as good as half the damn flags today. Well, That needs to be taken into consideration too. This position does not require a 4-star or a 3-star or a 2-star. Put a good colonel in there. You'll get better action. You'll get more efficient action out of that colonel. This does not require a brigadier. Put a major in there. That's what should be going on, those kinds of analyses, because back in the old days, as it were, a colonel ran the army.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need these stars. Now, here's part of the growth, and most of people don't realize this. When you join alliances like NATO, for example, and it's the greatest example of this, grade inflation occurs immediately. Each country has to match each other country. So you come up with a 3-star, they come up with a 4-star. You come up with a 4-star, they come up with a 4-star to match him. Yeah, it's crazy, but there's so many useless flag officers in NATO that you could cut it in half tomorrow morning and you would notice an increase in alliance efficiency, not a decrease.
So I don't know that you haven't been, but I will assume that you haven't gotten a call from Hegseth asking for your input.
Probably not.
Okay. A fair assumption. Okay. But do you have any insight into what will the standards be? What will the matrix? How are they going to determine who stays and who goes?
You should have Colonel Douglas McGregor on, because he was an architect in his previous incarnation of much of what Hegseth just talked about. In fact, he's written about it. And for that matter, as I was telling Colonel McGregor the other day, Doug, Colin Powell and Rich Armitage brought a similar plan to Caspar Weinberger when he was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, and Armitage was Assistant Secretary of Defense for National Security Affairs, and Powell was the military assistant to Weinberger. And Weinberger's look at it was summed up by, this looks good, but it's politically impossible. So there have been people who've thought about this, very good people who've thought about this before the flag officer reductions, and even in greater percentages than Hegseth was talking about. And McGregor is one of them. In fact, Doug actually thinks that Hegseth took his book and his paper and sort of condensed it into that video. So it's not like it's something new. The newness of it is the meeting, the president now coming, and the atmosphere that's going to be created. That's the newness, and that's the danger.
Is there another concern relative to Hegseth being qualified to run the Department of Defense? I'm sorry, the Department of War. As I understand it, historically, there's supposed to be a separation. This is supposed to be a civilian post.
Yes.
And we know, for example, Lloyd Austin, retired general, and some would even question the fact that he came out of, was it Raytheon?
Yeah.
Okay. So
and more than that, he came out of uniform. This is a very dangerous thing I think we're doing. Our founders would never have permitted this.
Go ahead.
Of making that civilian position a military person. You know, when George Marshall was made it, there was a hue and cry on the Hill. But Marshall's reputation was so solid and his integrity so solid, and he had been out of uniform for quite a while at that point, that they went ahead and did it. But they have to grant waivers for it, as they did for Austin.
Oh, yeah. You mean Lloyd Austin came out of uniform, he retired to take the job.
And too close, way too close. Got it.
And way too close to the military industrial complex.
Yes, both those things. Yes.
Well, Hegseth can't even do that.
Well, Hegseth is one criterion is fulfilled there. He's a civilian. But the others,
he's a living human being.
Yeah, okay, I'll go along with that. Maybe. He's not qualified for the job. There's no question about that. He's not qualified for the job. I don't care if he's a nuclear physicist with a PhD in molecular theory or something. He's not qualified for the job. He doesn't have the management expertise, and he doesn't have the expertise that would come from, let's say, someone like a McNamara. I would say, too, that was a sorry choice for a Secretary of Defense. But McNamara had run Ford Motor Company, as I recall, and he had a vast array of experience in corporate America.
In management.
Yeah, and that's probably the single most criterion that is used by presidents to pick secretaries of defense. They have managed, they have run, been chief executives or nearly so of very large organizations, because that's what it's the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth. They use more fuel than the country of Portugal every year. They burn more ExxonMobil product than Portugal. I mean, this is a huge operation.
Mm-hmm.
And someone like Hegseth does not have the experience to do it. And worse than that, the few people he brought in that might have had a modicum of experience, they fired. So I don't know who is actually running the Department of Defense now, or the Department of War.
We kick that around somewhat jokingly, but does the change of the name of the department signal something to you, as in we're going to war? And the fact that, as far as I know, it really requires an act of Congress to change the name, whereas the president just decided, I'm changing the name of Bloomingdale's to Macy's. You
know, the next president could executive order it out of existence as soon as he comes in if he wants to. It's not something that is put in concrete because it's not been approved by the Congress. The other aspect of it you hit on is very pertinent. What are we but a war state since 9/11? There's not a day we have not been at war since 9/11. And now we're at extracurricular war, if you will. Extra legal war. We're killing people on the high seas without due process. This is a war crime. This is a war crime. So yeah, it's appropriately named now. That's for sure.
So, man, but before we get to that, because this I think is an important lead-in to the Venezuela conversation. Trump's speech at the UN has sparked an incredible amount of anxiety over shared global commitments. I remember reading a story that the last time he addressed the United Nations, a lot of countries laughed. This time they were silent because they were totally befuddled and confused. I tell my students that it's important to understand that the United Nations is a diplomatic organization. And as a diplomatic organization, there are rules of decorum that you're supposed to follow. And one of the things is you don't go into the organization and tell the organization it ain't worth a damn.
And you don't take a speech that's supposed to be 15 minutes maximum and make it 59 minutes or so.
So what were some of your takeaways from as a retired colonel? What were some of your takeaways that maybe that my ears might not have picked up on?
He was very dismissive of some things that other countries are very seized of now, not least of which is climate change. And I would say I've been involved with this for about 17 years with the military and then with the interagency group as a whole, Climate Security Working Group, other places like that. I've seen the whole gamut of scientific evidence, NASA, NOAA, all the agencies, UN Council. There's no question in my mind, nor is there any question in my mind that 86 to 96% of the scientists in the world, not just in America, believe that we have a huge and possibly existential challenge. And he calls it a hoax. Now, all across the world, people are spending money, hard-earned tax dollars on fighting climate change, on renewables, on all the things that are necessary in order to meet this challenge. And he just called it a hoax. To their faces, he called it a hoax. He called wind turbines a hoax. There are people with billions of dollars, including us, invested in wind turbines. And he essentially said it was a hoax created by evil people. Well, I got news for him. The evil is in the people calling it a hoax. The evil is in his mouth, because this, next to nuclear weapons, is probably the greatest challenge the human race faces in the 21st century. And it's coming on like gangbusters. I mean, all these models we were using in the Climate Security Working Group, for example, they were rudimentary when I first started out. I won't say rudimentary. They just needed a lot more variables. And many people were out there collecting the variables, all of them certified scientists. As we would add variables to the computer programming, it wouldn't get better, it would get worse. And now that many of the variables that were not available 15 years ago, 20 years ago, have been added to the computer models, it is far worse. For example, up north of Norway in the Barents Sea, the particular complex up there was adding to sea rise in a moderate to a little more than moderate way for about a decade. All of a sudden now it's decided it wants to, and it's really glacial ice melt, it wants to add at about 2 to 3 times the rate it was adding. Go down and look at the Antarctic and what's happening there with the 2 major glaciers there. One of them is holding the other one, which is formidable indeed, back. But the one that's anchoring the formidable one is formidable itself, and they're both going. We're talking about anywhere from an 8 to a 15-foot sea rise globally, if that happens. We're talking about the current that flows up by the UK and allows London to have moderate temperatures and so forth, going away, sinking, and possibly turning London into Moscow plus. There are some really serious things that are happening much faster than we thought they would, that the computers predicted they would. In short, it is upon us. We are going to, by mid-century, probably have 1 billion to 2 billion people in the world who are without sustenance, can't grow crops, can't drink water, and they're going to be moving, I'll guarantee you. And this is nothing new. Throughout human history, for 50,000 years, migration has happened because of climate incidents and climate change. Well, we're going to have a big one, and it's anthropomorphic. It's helped by man and by greenhouse gases and so forth. So we're the first, I guess you'd say, that have the technology to do something about it, but we don't have the wisdom to. And Donald Trump is reversing and killing many of the things that we've been laboring on ever since we began to get seized of this problem, including the Department of War, DOD then, and the rest of the government. He's reversing a lot of that. He's the evil man. He's the evil man.
And to your point, what scientists 15, 20 years ago were looking at and projecting, that we now see manifesting itself. Now you have a compounding effect that now it's like compounding interest. Now that it has started, it just grows and grows at an exponentially faster rate based upon what transpired before it. And you just said something that connected some dots for me. And that is, when you start talking about migration patterns and people having to leave their homes and move to other places, one of the things that Donald Trump talked about, I believe he talked about this in his UN speech, was changing the international law about people declaring
amnesty.
Yeah. That now
seeking asylum. Yeah.
Asylum. Thank you.
Yeah.
That now you seek asylum in the first country you set foot in. You don't seek asylum in the place you want to live.
Let me tell you,
just mentioning this ties all that together.
Let me tell you about the simulation we ran with about 17.
Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, about 17 countries participated. It was sponsored by the Center for Naval Analyses. And this is some years ago. And we briefed the simulation after 2 years of running different aspects of it throughout the 2 years. We had the whole group there. We had the Japanese, the Germans. Briefer is behind the lectern, just reading his notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about the worst case scenario that we stumbled upon. And by the way, we're way beyond worst case scenario now. In 2065. Worst case scenario is there's 500 million people on the move. Half of them are male. Half of that half is under 30. Wow. They've got a Kalashnikov and 20 rounds of ammunition, and they aren't going to be stopped because they're dying. And what the peer powers do, and you know who the peer powers are, all the way from Tokyo across to Washington, across to London and Moscow and to Beijing, they put machine guns and troops on their southern borders and start shooting people. This briefing was so alarming that one of the Europeans jumped up and said, "You can't tell me that my country participating in that simulation would do that." And the game briefer just reached under the podium and pulled out the list of the people from that country who'd participated. Former chancellors, former foreign ministers, former heads of military, and so forth. And the guy sat down and shut up. That was 10, 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's gotten much worse. And it's going to get by 2050, 2060 to the point where, Trump is leading that movement, if you will. He's unconscious of it, but he's got troops on our southern border. That's what these countries do in the worst case scenario, because they can't afford to take the little bit of sustenance that they still have, the little bit of arable land and so forth that they still have. And by the way, by this time, we're also raising wheat in northern Canada. We've moved the belt, if you will, the corn and wheat belt up into Manitoba and Saskatchewan, because that's how the weather's moving. And Trump foreshadows it. We're going to shoot people on our southern border.
Along with the people we're looking to shoot in our urban centers.
Well, we're already shooting people on the high seas.
Well, and we're already shooting people on the high seas. Venezuela's foreign minister at the UN General Assembly says we've suffered countless U.S. attacks. As we look at the utter lawlessness, is it 3 or 4 boats that we've sunk now?
That we know about. I think it's 3. Yeah.
Right.
I think this last one, just looking at the video, which I looked at this morning, probably was a what we call a cigarette boat, a fast boat, and it probably was running drugs. But that's no reason to blow them out of the water.
Well, and the key word you just used there is probably, because that means that there was no due process provided for us to know whether they were just practicing for the next speedboat race or whether they were actually running drugs.
Well, let's put it on the other foot. Let's say we go into Washington, D.C., we go to the corner of New York and H or whatever, and there's a guy with a whole bunch of cocaine selling it. Okay, you got prima facie evidence that he's a drug dude. You blow him away. You don't arrest him and put him in jail and try him. You blow him away right there on the street corner. That's what Trump would do.
To the first boat, I've said this before, but I'll reiterate it. 11 people on the boat.
Yeah, probably trafficking in people.
Well, okay, but not trafficking in drugs, because you don't need 11 people on a drug boat each one of those people, if the average weight was 180 pounds, 10 of those people, that's 1,800 pounds of people that could be profitable narcotics. The math, we can talk about how horrific and evil drug dealers are, but they're pretty good businessmen.
Yep. And these people running people too are good businessmen.
There you go.
And you could say in many respects they're doing a service, because usually they're running people, they're charging an arm and a leg for it, as they are in the Red Sea. They're running people out of Yemen into Africa, and people believe this. I couldn't believe this when I was briefed on this. And they're running people out of Africa into Yemen so they can get to Saudi Arabia and be slaves for the Saudis. So you got this traffic, and it's $2,500 US to cross in any event, whether you're going east or west. So these people are making a fortune off these people who are getting out of, poverty or going to work where they can make some money. And that's really true about the area where we did what we did with respect to Venezuela, to this boat with, 11, 12, 13 people on it. Probably people being trafficked. But there's a service being performed there, and it's a service that people are going to charge money for. People are going to want to leave where there isn't a prospect for their future and go somewhere where there is a prospect for their future. That's just human nature.
It's the math is pretty simple.
Yeah.
So we seized the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C.,
which was unlawful also.
Because that's considered foreign territory.
Yep.
We then tried to impose Juan Guaido on the Venezuelan people to replace the democratically elected president, Nicolas Maduro.
Juan Guaido has, my Colombian friends tell me, maybe 6-7% political support in Venezuela.
Wow. He could be a Democrat here.
Yeah. Nasty.
Because that's about where they are right now.
You're right.
So my question is the focus on Venezuela and admittance by the administration that the Ukraine catastrophe is a catastrophe and has failed, that China we know now we can't beat, and that this is now the next distraction because they can't admit the realities that are playing out right before our eyes? Or is that too simplistic?
No, I think you're onto something there, especially with respect to interpreting Trump.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there's an Ahmad Chalabi aspect to Venezuela.
Oh, okay.
We have a couple of people. One of them is, you can guess the country from whence he comes, Israel.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is an Israeli, and the other one is a former CIA agent who essentially got relieved in Afghanistan in the first year of our occupation there, and essentially sent home. Wrote a book called Jawbreakers. His name's Gary Bernstein. Both of these men are feeding Trump through his emissaries, not through Tulsi Gabbard, not through the director of the CIA, not through any established intelligence entity, but directly to Trump. I figure probably through people like Steve Miller and Laura Loomer.
Okay.
They're feeding them the intelligence, and I hate to use that term because it's like curveball. Remember curveball?
Yes.
That's what's happening. And these people are feeding this intelligence, and Trump is believing it on Trinidad, the group down there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're making it up.
You just mentioned Afghanistan, and that just made me think about another question I wanted to ask you. All of a sudden now, Donald Trump tells the Taliban, oh, we're taking back Bagram Air Base. We built it, which we didn't. We built it. We're coming back. We're taking it back. So I then had to ask, why would you think to do that unless you're also forecasting the need for that space as a either transit point, launching point, some other kind of point, because you do foresee or portend attacking China?
It could even be preliminary to that,
Okay.
That would be the ultimate goal, but preliminary could be attacking Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, they got borders.
Mm-hmm.
And the Iranians actually helped us in October of 2001. They actually helped us in fighting in Afghanistan and in finding out where Al Qaeda was and such. So that could be it. I don't know where Trump pulled that out. There are reasons that we could have stayed in Afghanistan for strategic purposes, not for state building. You're right next door to the probably most dangerous nuclear stockpile in that region, Pakistan's.
Mm-hmm.
You're right next door to the Uyghurs, whom you could use CIA first and then maybe some clandestine operations, including the military, to fight the Han Chinese if you went to war with them, because the Uyghurs don't like the Han Chinese. And then third, you'd be in the middle of China's principal base road initiative because it flows through Central Asia.
Mm-hmm.
But we've talked about that amongst my military friends too. And we've said, good Lord, the Taliban would not let you stay there. They would not let you stay there. They'd make your life miserable, and China would support them.
Because let me see if I've got this history right. We first went into Afghanistan to fight the Taliban.
Not really. We went to find Al Qaeda and get them. That was George Bush. I went to a private briefing by the President of the United States, and that was the purpose. And I believed him. He was in a rage. He was in a rage. He had to have some Christians come into the Oval Office and calm him down. He even admitted that to us. He said, I had Franklin Graham and a bunch of people come into the Oval Office, and I told them, I'm in a rage and I'm going to do something I shouldn't do. So calm me down. And they helped to calm him down. But as you can imagine, this group of Christians essentially said, we understand vengeance.
Right.
So we went in there to get Al Qaeda.
Okay.
And we lingered and we lingered and we lingered and we lingered. And it was for state building, supposedly. We were going to build a state there. Well, we were up against the ISI in Pakistan, the CIA in our own country. The CIA ran Afghanistan, not the military. Mm-hmm. And the ISI in Pakistan helped. And that was a dangerous combination. And it made sure that we couldn't do anything but stay in Afghanistan for 20 years and come out looking just as bad as we did when we left Iraq, because we weren't intent on doing anything that was doable. We were just intent on staying there. That's what we do. It's unconscionable what we've been doing for the last 20 years. We're doing the same thing in Somalia, but we're doing it from the air. We're killing people every month in Somalia from the air, every now and then drifting over into Kenya or some other place in Africa. We're a disaster, Dr. Leon. We're a disaster.
I remember reading in Oil and Gas Journal around the time that we were looking to go into Afghanistan, that George W.'s father and his Secretary of State, Jim Baker, were going through the former Soviet republics, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and cutting oil deals, because the plan was to take that oil, have a pipeline through Afghanistan. And I remember reading this in Oil, and it wasn't what I was reading.
Don't leave Al Gore out. Al Gore was big time in there.
Okay, his name wasn't in what I was reading.
Occidental and Al Gore.
Okay. But the whole thing centered around pipelines, and that there was no way in the world that they were going to be able to build a pipeline with an unfriendly government in power in Afghanistan at the time.
That's pipe dreaming. I'm not making a pun.
Gotcha.
That was pipe dreaming at the time, because we were looking at Baku and the Caspian Sea, where some big majors estimate there's 100 years of petroleum, methane, and crude underneath the Caspian Sea, which is dynamite for the Base Road Initiative in the center of Asia, because that's enough to fuel everything from Samarkand to Dushanbe to Beijing for the next 50 years. There's so much there. And China's now building pipelines, and has built railroads. If you look at the map, China's got a railroad in the north that goes all the way into Europe, a railroad in the center that goes all the way to Berlin and beyond, and is now kind of stopped by the war in Ukraine. And then you've got one that goes down through the south and up through Iran. Those railroads are the future, and the pipelines accompany them. They don't have to go on the high sea with their produce. And who do they fear on the high seas? The United States Navy. So they're getting away from that Navy. Everything's going to be land-based. This is all happening. The power in the world is shifting to the east. The magnet pulling that power is China. And we were trying to counter that. There's a great book by a guy by the name of Hugh Pope called Sons of the Conquerors, and he talks about this. And there's a page in the center where there's a photograph. And the photograph is of U.S. paratroopers for the first time talking to people on the periphery of the Caspian Sea. That's the first time they had ever been there. And that photograph is a prophecy of what was going to happen, but we're not much involved in it anymore because we've been beaten. We've been beaten back, pushed back, and our mistakes have caused us to contribute to that defeat, like supporting Ukraine, like what we're doing in NATO in general, like what we're doing out in Iran, what we're doing in Gaza and Syria. We're forcing that consortium of powers to be all powerful and to be all powerful at our ultimate expense. We're creating the world's next imperial entity, and they love it. They love it because they aren't shedding any blood to do it. We're the ones shedding blood.
I was waiting for you to finish that thought so that I could ask you the question, is one of the problems we're fighting an economic challenge with militarism?
Yes. Militarism and sanctions.
Right. Yes.
We have 62 countries under sanctions. They hate our guts. One person told me in the Congress,
that's almost like 70% of the world's population.
If you do the percentage and you say China's in there and India's in there with a couple of billion plus, it is.
Yeah, I was just looking at BRICS. BRICS represents Brazil, India, China, South Africa. They represent India. They represent like 70% of the world's population.
Yeah, and the SCO is not all BRICS, but BRICS that overlaps with the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But that's 14 building to 16. I mean, 2/3 of the world now is not on our side, and a good half of that 2/3 is vehemently opposed to us.
And what are those entities doing? They're increasing trade.
Yep.
They're trying to strengthen economies. They're trying to develop currencies. They're trying to raise the standard of living.
It's called the ASEAN model, in many respects. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which I grew up on in the Pacific when I was a major and then a lieutenant colonel.
Okay.
And we were constantly trying to talk the ASEAN leaders, Malaysia, even Singapore. We were trying to talk them into a security component. We don't want a security component. We see NATO. We see what Japan and you do. We see what Korea and you do. We don't want that. We are in the business of business. Now they're one of the most successful consortiums on the face of the earth. They didn't want a security component. They said that would hurt us.
That reminds me of, and those that know the show know I'm about to mention a Godfather reference when the line is, violence is bad for business.
Yeah. You think? Trump seems to think, I'm not a war man. I'm not a war. Kill another person on the high seas. I'm not a war man. I'm not stopping Gaza. I'm not a war man. Oh, I'm funneling equipment to Ukraine through NATO. He's not a war man. He's a proxy war man.
Oh, I like that.
Other people bleed for Donald.
I like that. Wow. Wow. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, man, thank you. That was incredibly insightful, as it always is. I mean, I'm not surprised.
Scary.
I'm just appreciative. Yes, sir.
I don't think I'm 81 years old now. I don't think I've ever been so frightened for my country.
I was just going to ask you, what are the two things you want my audience to walk away from this conversation having a better understanding of? And then we're done.
We need to take our country back, and we need to do it hopefully through the ballot box. But if there is no ballot box opportunity, you know how we took it from the British.
Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and I look forward to having you back.
It's always fun being with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. We're going to replay an interview we had with Dan Kovalik because it's proving to be very, very prophetic. And so stay tuned tomorrow. We've got a interview with Dan Kovalik. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. What you heard just now from Colonel Wilkerson, phenomenal. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because we're rhetoric free. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed, and prosperous and safe remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.